Good morning, everyone. Well, we'll see if it'll work with me. The beard may be affecting it a bit, but we'll work with it with what we can. Well, we'll see. All right. So it's been a great weekend, right quick. Melinda and I this weekend were blessed to get to go to Grafton and get to watch the Eagles out there and stuff. And so earlier, I was just talking about in my prayer ways in which we get to see God present in this world. Actually, we'll just go without that. We'll work with the mic. So we think about the different ways in which we see God present and active, and Grafton, I think, is one of those places where you definitely get to see that. I was talking with Todd about it earlier, but you do get that sense when you're driving out there that you're kind of like driving beside an ocean almost. Just that drive out there in itself is so scenic and beautiful. But also, just the really cool part is that in this time of year, all the bald eagles are migrating out there, and so we saw like probably at least 10 or 11. We didn't go on the tour out there. I've heard people say they see like 75 in one day, which is crazy to me to think about. Because in Texas, that's just like you don't see those, and if you do, it's a very rare, amazing thing. And so for us to see them out there regularly was pretty amazing, and a pretty cool way to see God's presence. And then again, just in a very different way of seeing God's presence this morning, instead of going to Bible class, we were blessed to go out with Griff and Jane out at Park Place in Wing Haven, and the whole youth group came out to worship with them. And I think we probably increased the class size by about 3 times, I think. And so it was great, great getting to see our kids out there worshiping with them. Thank you to all of y'all for showing up. I know that they really appreciated that. And thank y'all for allowing me to speak today. So I just want to begin by kind of setting up a scenario for all of us. And if you need to close your eyes to kind of visualize this, go ahead. But if you want to keep them open, that's fine too. But I want you to just imagine a situation in which you're working for like a huge company, something like Apple or Amazon, huge company like that. So you started out at this company fresh out of college, right? And you've started off in a very, very small role. But as time has gone on over the years, you've worked your way up, right? You've worked your way up in the ranks, gone up the corporate ladder, and now you hold a pretty high position here. You're head of the company's accounting and finance division. Sounds horrible to me, but those that are accountants, thank you. But you're head of the accounting and finance division. You're handling all the money here in the States. Just that happens to be passed around nationally here. But during your time with the company, as you've spent this time here, you've made plenty of friends. You've actually gotten to know and get in good graces with the family that owns the company. And so much so that you regularly attend like their parties, their events, their gatherings at their private estates. So life is looking pretty good, right? You're not the highest position, but you're definitely not hurting for money. But one day, while you're working, you overhear talk, just amongst your coworkers and all that. You overhear talk about how some people, how there's kind of this, there's like this movement or this little kind of conglomerate out there of people that have claimed that your company is endorsing slave labor from another company in a foreign country. Right, that one of the companies that they're partnering with or working with in some way or another that's making their small bits of technology that go into whatever big thing you're making, this company that you're working with endorses slave labor. You've not heard of this company, though, because they're a foreign company, and again, they're responsible for making different components, and you're focused on that financial side. But so you don't think much of it first. You're like, this is probably just another one of those little rumors going around the mill. But as time goes by, you still hear word going around a little bit, and you try to avoid it, but the thought still lingers in the back of your head. You're a good person, so you're wondering, is there any merit to the things that are being said here? These thoughts, they keep nagging at you. And so finally, your curiosity gets the better of you, and you decide to look into these claims. Right? And so upon doing some research into the claims that are being made, first you find out which company it is that's being accused of this slave labor. And being the ever vigilant, curious researcher that you are after that, you decide to look deeper into this company. And since you hold such a high position in this accounting and finance division, you're able to look into these financial records and documents for this company, and you notice some things aren't right. The numbers don't match up to sales. And salaries, they haven't been allocated as was claimed in the meetings that you've been to. You notice that there are many more positions of employment than the salaries in that company can justify. And now you have that sick feeling in the pit of your stomach that just something isn't right. And now you're typically not one to start an argument. You're conflict avoidant, let's just say. And in fact, it's one of your least favorite things to do. You don't like to start any kind of controversy, any kind of conflict or anything like that. But this thought and this feeling in the pit of your stomach keeps nagging at you. And so let alone, again, you've known all the people in this department, in this company for that matter, for years now, right? And you possibly can't imagine them supporting something so heinous or being in partnership and cahoots. But when Ted, no, not our Ted, but when Ted, your fellow worker and co-director over the International Accounting and Finance Division and a big corporate meeting starts presenting these numbers in front of all these heads of the company and big wigs, he starts presenting these numbers, they conflict with your findings that you did in your studies. And in this moment, there's a part of your corporation that isn't being honest. So, what are you going to do here in this moment? I'm going to tell you what you're going to do. Against all your impulses and against all your urges, in the middle of this meeting, you speak up. In the middle of his presentation, for that matter, and you point out, right, those numbers don't match up. And all the meanwhile, you start hearing grumblings around the table. You notice that the faces of the heads of this company have gone beet red in this moment. And so the chief financial officer then calls the meeting to an abrupt halt. And everyone goes to take their 10-minute break, right? It kind of comes out of nowhere, but everybody goes to take their 10-minute break. And you get up, as you see all the heads of the corporation, though, have remained seated. You get up, and they tell you to stay with them. And upon the other guests exiting, your employees turn to you, or your employers turn to you, and they promptly tell you that you've been fired. Gather your stuff, get out. What are you feeling in this moment? So you leave, right? You're stunned, probably, at the sudden change, right, of these people that you've known so well, but with a feeling, and maybe in a sense, for some of y'all, if y'all are really focused on the justice aspect of it, maybe you have a feeling of reassurance that, what you've done is right. Right? You did the right thing, that you won't have, and that you might not have trouble finding another job. After all, you were pretty high up in these ranks. You won't have trouble finding another job because you've gotten to know other employees, or employers of other companies just during your time there. But a few days pass, and you haven't heard anything from anyone. And a few weeks pass, you still haven't heard anything from another company. And again, like I said, you've crossed paths with a lot of these employers from other companies up to this point. And so you call someone up that's a pretty good friend of yours from another company who's in charge of hiring and firing and all that. You talk with him about what's going on. And this employer tells you, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but these employers of this last company that you were at have made up all sorts of lies about you, about your work ethic, about your willingness to do different things, your qualifications, and have urged other companies around us not to hire you. And so you realize in this moment that the smear campaign has begun, right? That these people that you once thought you knew so well and shared a deep relationship with, these people who you've been to many, many gatherings with, per se, have now blacklisted you. You've gone from living comfortably with a good means of regular income to no security, no one who is willing or able to help you. What are you going to do now? As we think about Exodus, we have a guy in a pretty similar situation. Right? Whenever we think about Moses, some of our students, we went through this fairly recently, but most of us know the story of Moses. You've got this order that goes out from Egypt, from the Pharaoh of Egypt, at the time he sees that Israel is growing in numbers, and it's growing really quickly. And Egypt gets scared. They're thinking, these people are going to outgrow us, and they're going to overpower us. And so then he starts coming up with all these ideas in order to stop this from happening. So they enslave Israel at first, and then they notice even though they enslave them, even though they're treating them pretty badly, they're still growing. And so the Pharaoh then orders all the firstborn males of the families to be killed. And so you've got these firstborn males being killed. Well, Moses' mom wants to protect Moses, wants to save him. And so she puts him in a little basket, goes floating down the river. Thankfully, doesn't get eaten by a crocodile on the way down. And then he gets found by a lady who just so happens to be Pharaoh's daughter. Right? And then we know what happens next, that Moses kind of grows up in the house of Pharaoh. Right? He grows up in the family, an Israelite grows up in the family of the one who's doing all this persecuting, who started all of this persecuting to begin with. He's adopted into the royal family. And as we think about this, Moses, again, he would never be the top man in this family. But again, growing up in the royal family, he still knew what luxury was, especially compared to the other Israelites who were living in that day and age. And we're then told that one day, in the midst of this, that in chapter 2, verse 11, after Moses had grown up, he went out to his people, the Israelites, and he saw their forced labor. And again, whenever we think about Moses, even though he grew up in this royal household, even though it was a royal household of Egypt, Moses, would have known that he was an Israelite. Right, we know that the lady that comes in to nurse him as he grows up is his own mother. His sister's involved in his life with that, and so there's nothing to inform us that his heritage or anything like that would have been kept a secret. So Moses would have known that he was an Israelite, and he sees that the same people as him, the people that he actually belongs to, are being forced into labor. And he sees that this labor they're being forced into isn't just they're being told to work and go do it, right? But if they don't fulfill it the way that these Egyptians want, they're being beaten. They're being tortured. And so Moses, I'm sure, during his day, he probably saw it happening time and again. We see that it says he sees it here in verse 11, but Moses had probably seen this time and again, right? This isn't just something that you could just pass up or walk past every day and not notice, right? Moses has been seeing it, and it's probably been building up. Right, and eventually one day Moses sees an Egyptian officer beating one of the slaves, as we know in the story. And as he sees this Egyptian officer beating this slave, Moses can't take it anymore. We actually see that he kind of makes a calculation. He looks this way and that, it says, and then he takes a stone, and we know probably the rest of the story that he takes this stone and he kills the Egyptian officer. And then he tries to bury him. Right, he tries to hide him away. And after all this, Moses, he thinks he's done pretty good. Right? He thinks he's done the right thing. He has that same sense of justification that maybe we did. But then he sees these two Israelite people, right? These people that he's just fought on behalf of in his own mind. He sees these two Israelite people arguing with one another, right? And so Moses tries to go between them and resolve the argument, thinking that, I saved them, I helped them, they're going to respond to me. But he doesn't quite get the response that he's expecting. If y'all remember, instead of thanking Moses, they respond by asking Moses if he plans to kill them as well. And so very quickly, in this moment, Moses finds out that nobody is on his side. He finds out that he's all alone. And so Moses really has no other option. He doesn't know what to do in this moment other than run away. And he runs away to the land of Midian with Pharaoh, as we see, kind of getting closer towards the end of chapter 2, seeking to kill him. And so the reason Moses probably flees to Midian is because Midian is its own region, right? It's kind of outside of Egypt, not ruled by their control, and so therefore it was out of their jurisdiction. He found safety there. But we're then told that Moses sits down by a well in this story. He goes out in the wilderness and he sits down by this well, and he witnesses this dispute between the 7 daughters of Reuel, or later known as Jethro, as we're going to see in chapter 3, and some of the local shepherds. The local shepherds are there trying to feed their sheep, and they see that these women are gathering water, but they say, this is for our sheep, and they start to drive them away. But Moses comes to their defense. He comes to their aid, displays some good chivalry there in that moment. And again, this tells us a sign of the times. This part always gets me. Because of Moses' chivalry then, as we see later on, the priest of Midian, Ruel, he says, you're a great guy, right? You defended my daughters today, so in return, I'm going to give you one of my daughters to marry. So it's like, man, it's like just hold a door open for a lady and you're marrying her. It's pretty crazy back in that day and age. But anyway, so he gives him his daughter Zipporah. Moses gets her hand in marriage, and as we see, Moses and Zipporah then have a son. And they give him a name that I want us to hold on to as we keep going through this lesson. But they give him this name Gershom. And we actually see that the meaning behind this name Gershom, it says that they name him that because Moses said, I have been an alien residing in a foreign land. And when we really think about the story of Moses here, kind of captures the essence of everything that Moses has been dealing with up to this point. Because when you think about it, Moses grew up in Egypt. Everything he kind of would have known, like we said, he knew his heritage in a sense, but everything he would have known about custom, about how to conduct himself, about how to show himself before others and all that would have been Egyptian, even though he wasn't an Egyptian. And that was probably made known to Moses a time or two by the Egyptian people themselves. So Moses, again, he's been an alien living in the foreign land of Egypt, but at the same time, if all these customs of Egypt are what Moses has known, he's also been an alien to his own people. And so it's kind of a both-and situation that we see here with Moses. And so as we see at the end of chapter 2, though, Moses is here claiming to be this alien in a foreign land. And as it says here in the last verses 23 through 24, after a long time, the king of Egypt died. And the Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. And out of the slavery, their cry for help rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. And whenever we think about that, at first it kind of sounds like kind of a weird way to end a chapter, just that God took notice. But at the same time, as I've looked into this chapter more and more, I like to watch movies a lot and stuff, and every good movie, especially if it's got a sequel, is going to end on a cliffhanger. Right? And in the same way, I think that that's kind of what's happening here in chapter 2. Chapter 2 ends on this cliffhanger that Pharaoh has died, shows that the time has changed, right? There's been a time change that's happened in our story, but also at the very end, God has noticed his people, and God has heard their cries. And so you're left with this sense at the end of chapter 2 that something big's about to happen. God's about to do something big in this story. And so as we jump into the start of chapter 3, we continue to get that sense, right? Those final words of chapter 2 give us this idea that something big's about to happen. God's going to remember his covenant that he made with Isaac and Abraham and Jacob. And then the introduction of chapter 3 is much like the introduction to those movies where it starts off slow, but you know it's about to build into something. I always think about, I really like the Marvel movies a lot. I like Avengers Infinity War is one of my favorite movies, and it just ends on this very, dark note, right, where all these heroes that you've seen winning up to every point in each movie lose, right, and it seems like evil has won, pretty much. Death has won. And so you're left with this ending that's pretty dark, but then as everybody got ready for the final part, endgame of Avengers, that you had been building up to for years and all that, I kind of get that same feeling whenever we jump into Moses' story here. And it starts off slow in endgame, but we know that there's something huge that's going to happen at the end. In the same way, here in chapter 3, we get that same kind of introduction. We start off with Moses, again, this guy who had been in a really good position, who had known a life of pretty good luxury compared to every other Israelite probably at that time. Moses is now keeping a flock, as we see at the start of chapter 3. He's a no-name shepherd out in the wilderness keeping his flock. And as he's working his flock, he comes to Horeb, or later known as Sinai, the mountain of God. And as he comes to Sinai, many of us know this next part well, but an angel of the Lord, it says, comes to Moses in the form of a burning bush. And it always strikes me, I always get a laugh out of this, because as it says there in 3 verse 2, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. And he looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. And I like how it words it here in the NRSV. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see that this bush has not burned up. And so again, just reading the wording like that makes me think of like a Shakespearean play where it's like Moses is walking along and he just sees this burning bush. He's, hark, a bush, it's burning. I must go see this. You know, I mean, if I was Moses, if I'm a shepherd out there, I'm going to be walking along, see a bush that's burning, not burned up, just holy cow, like, this is crazy, right? This is just absolutely amazing, right? This is not your average, ordinary, everyday bush, right? It's on fire, but it's not burning. And so Moses, probably more than Hark, he's probably freaked out, right? But yet, even when he sees this burning bush right before him, he hears a voice call out. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. And I'll steal from Eric here because he talked about this in his class a couple of weeks ago. And some of us that were in that class may remember, but whenever anybody gives that response, here I am, right? That's not just them saying, here I am geographically, right? Not just, here I am before you, but rather, I'm here and I'm willing to do whatever you ask of me. That statement in itself, here I am, shows an ultimate willingness. A willingness to go to the most extreme of lengths to accomplish whatever is going to be asked of you. And so Moses, even though he's freaked out, even though he knows he's in the presence of great power in this moment, he hears this voice call out and he responds, here I am. And then notice what happens. The bush, this voice coming out from it says, come no closer, remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And so we have this idea, again, that where Moses is now is in the presence of a greater power than Moses has ever experienced in his life. And then as we know, God then tells Moses, as we scroll down the verses a bit more, that he's going to free the Israelites from their captivity to Egypt. And God is going to use Moses in order to do this. But then we finally come to the passage that I want us to focus on. Ted read for us earlier, but I want us to pick up in verse 11 here. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He said, I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain. But Moses said to God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, thus you shall say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my title for all generations. And so we have this moment, where Moses responds, who am I? Right? Who am I that I should be the one to go to Pharaoh? I'm a nobody. I'm an outcast here, and you're sending me. And really, can we really blame Moses for asking that question? In all reality, whenever we think about our own lives, whenever we think about who we are as people, right? While we see that there's definitely some low confidence on Moses' part, this question reflects humility, right? I think this is the same question that most of us would be asking, right? Why would you choose me? You could choose anybody in the world. Why would you choose me? And it's probably the most understandable response that one could have, especially Moses in the situation that he's in, when we think about the recent events that had happened in his life. So right quick, just whenever I ask you who the ideal candidate or spokesperson for God would be, what would be the immediate words that would pop into your mind? Just throw out some words here. ideal candidate to speak for God, what would be some traits about that person? Louder? I think I heard somebody say confident very quietly. Some irony in that response. Good speaker. Okay. Do what? Like, wise, yeah. Well liked too, A warrior, yeah. Maybe kind, loving, humble. Maybe noble, strong, intelligent.
A man that has a background, knowledge of God.
Yeah.
And Moses didn't have that.
No. Some words I can almost guarantee wouldn't be first on our list or top of the list. Popping into one's mind: killer, traitor, alien, and yet Moses was all these things. And when we think about it, Moses, we'd often say the Egyptians would see Moses as just a killer or a traitor, but the very first people that called Moses a killer were his own people. What, are you going to kill us too, like you killed them? And so while we see that this is an understandable question, God's response makes it known that this is still the wrong question to be asked. And God says, I am who I am, and I will be with you. And these few words are enough. And whenever we think about that, I want us to, God tells Moses to go before the Israelites. He asks him, how am I supposed to make it known to these people who it is that sent me? And God gives him that response, I am who I am. That the Hebrew there is Ayeh, Esher, Ayeh. And it is that I am who I am, or I will be what I will be. But it became a word later on, as we see and there in verse 14, I believe it is. No, 15. As it says, that, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, thus you shall say to the Israelites, the Lord. And if you notice here, and kids, y'all should remember this, hopefully. Test time. But it says, the Lord, the God of Israel, has sent you. And if you notice there, the Lord is written in all caps. And that only happens in certain parts of Scripture, but it's important for us to make note of that, because whenever we see the Lord in all capital letters like that, this is representative of a certain name that they had for God, known as Yahweh. And Yahweh was a word that they attributed to God as his name, but they also hardly ever spoke it. The Israelites didn't speak that name Yahweh hardly ever, and when they did, they spoke it with much reverence, much respect, because they didn't feel worthy to speak it. They see so much power behind this name that they don't feel worthy of being able to speak that name before others. And really, it's hard for us to fathom that, because words don't have as much power today as they used to. Right? They didn't speak, we didn't have as many words at that time as what we do now. We have words everywhere. They bombard us with words all the time. We see it on billboards everywhere. We see it on our phones all the time, on television. We have words around us constantly. Right? But they weren't reading words at that time a lot, because most of their stories that they gave were oratory. They spoke the stories to each other. They had certain people that would write at that time just because they didn't really see a huge need for it. But whenever they did write something down, it was because it was important. And there was a certain name that they attributed to God that they would write in all caps to make it known how important that word was. And so in the same way, this is who that God is. And it's to give y'all an idea of their idea of the power behind this name. It's kind of like Harry Potter. I know I'm going through all the nerd fandoms today, but in Harry Potter, if those of y'all who have read Harry Potter, the main bad guy in it is Voldemort, right? Spoiler alert. But for the longest time in the books, nobody speaks his name. Y'all remember what they refer to Voldemort as? He who must not be named, right? And then whenever somebody speaks his name, everybody goes, don't say his name, don't say his name. And just there in that moment, Voldemort's evil, and we see the power of that evil coming out. But what's interesting is that towards the end of the very first book, The Sorcerer's Stone, Harry's been speaking Voldemort's name left and right in this book. Everybody's been freaking out around Harry and stuff. But then Harry has this big conversation with Dumbledore after Harry almost dies. And Dumbledore speaks Voldemort's name, and then Harry goes, "Wait, you're not supposed to say his name." And Dumbledore speaks to Harry in that moment, and he says, "It's about time that we started saying it again. Because when you speak it more, you take away that power. You take away that influence." And I think inadvertently, in our own culture and society, at points we've done that with God. We've lost a sense of how capable God is, of what God is capable of doing, and of how powerful God is, and what power his name invokes. But for the Israelites, they knew this. And this is the point that God is making to Moses, is that I am the one who's sending you, and that's enough. It doesn't have anything to do with who you are, but it has everything to do with who I am. And so, through all this, we get this ancient Near Eastern view of holiness, right? That God is set apart, right? And in the past, whenever I look at this name and stuff, whenever I look at this whole scenario with this idea of removing sandals from your feet for being in the presence of God is in the place of holiness, I've often used this verse as an example of a different way of thinking about holiness in a sense than what Jesus teaches about holiness. But since then, I want to change that. Because the example Jesus sets for holiness is that it involves getting into the thick of it, right? Getting involved in other people's lives, getting involved in life's hard situations and making the goodness of God known. But whenever we think about this whole story and the whole situation that it's surrounding, we see a God who, even though he is so powerful and glorious that we're not capable, right? That we're not worthy to speak his name. He's also the very same God who has observed the misery of his people and who's heard their cries and who's going to get involved, who's going to do the hard work of getting in there with them in the midst of those cries, in the midst of that hardship, in the midst of that suffering. He's most certainly going to get into the thick of it, doing the hard work of responding to them and freeing them from that captivity through the vessel of Moses, because that's who God is. That's who the God we serve is. And so getting back to the real question that should be asked, it's not who am I, but who is I am. God used a man that had been labeled as a killer, a traitor, and an alien in a foreign land as a vessel to strike Egypt with all of his wonders and to lead his people out of captivity. And it's to this man that several of the Old Testament books we're blessed to read are attributed. And this isn't the first time that God has used an imperfect vessel to accomplish his purposes. And it wouldn't be the last. We see that going throughout the story of God's people. God uses continually imperfect vessels to make known who he is and to make known his purposes for the world. And he still very much does that today. And he will do it through each and every one of us if we're willing to let him. All of this makes known the power of the God that we serve, right? That he doesn't have to have a perfect vessel to make known his accomplishments, to make known who he is, but that he is capable of working through anybody. And that anyone is capable of becoming a vessel in service of God if they choose to trust in him. When we think about this life, everywhere that we go, we have an opportunity to share God's love and goodness with all of those that we encounter. But often, we don't feel qualified enough. We don't feel learned enough. We don't think ourselves worthy of being a vessel. God, if you only knew my past, right? If you only knew what I've done, you would think differently. But it's the very voice of God that has called us into his service. There's a prayer that one of my professors has given me that I have started praying some in the mornings and all that. And at one point in the prayer, it asks, "Oh Lord, open my ears to hear your call. Open my hands to receive your strength to do your will." How often are we listening for his call? How often are we opening our hands to receive that strength and willingness to go out and share with others who God is? I'm not going to reassure you, though, by telling you that you won't have conversations with people out in the world that aren't going to challenge your beliefs or your ways of thinking, that aren't going to challenge your ways of thinking about yourself and the ways that God can use you. Sometimes those things will happen. Ministering to others is a difficult task, as Moses makes known throughout his life, and as so many others do, but it's a blessing like no other. And those difficult times are necessary for growth for both us and for others. But God is most certainly at work in all of it. As God used Abraham, and he used Moses, and he used David, and so many other unqualified people to act on his behalf, to act as vessels, making God's presence known, to make his covenant faithfulness and love known, may God also use each and every one of you. And may you trust in the work that God is capable of doing. Trust in the great I am. Let's close with a word of prayer, and then we'll get up and sing after. Gracious God, you are good. And Lord, we thank you so much for all you are and all that you have done for us. Lord, we thank you for your covenant love and faithfulness. Lord, for your continual seeking after us. Even in the times when we convince ourselves it points to close ourselves off from you. When we convince ourselves that we are not worthy of your love, because in all reality we aren't, Lord. But you have given us through your grace the opportunity not only to know your love, but be vessels that share that love with others around us, that share your goodness with those around us. And Lord, I pray that we will take heart from the words that we read today, that we will use these words to inspire ourselves, to go out and reach out to others, and that we will recognize, Lord, that while we can do nothing of our own accord, Lord, your power gives us all strength. It gives us what we need to make you known. And we thank you, Lord, for all that you have done, and we praise you for being with us in all things. And we thank you and praise you for your covenant love that continually seeks after us. Despite our many flaws and our imperfections, you are near and you are here with us. And we praise you for that. And may we continually live a life of seeking after you, of seeking to know that love more and share it with others. And we thank you for the greatest example of love that we've received of all, which is Jesus Christ, who has shown us the ultimate example of who you are and what faithful following looks like. Thank you so much, God, for everything you are and all that you have done. Glory be to you. Glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, still is now, and forevermore shall be, worlds without end.